Hey everybody, today is Monday, July 26th, 2021. Coming up on the show today, from the documentary Billie Eilish, The World's a Little Blurry, editor Greg Finton.
Being a documentary editor is as close as you can get to being a writer or director without having those titles. I just instantly fell in love with it.
And editor Lynzee Klingman.
I think the film's always discovered in the cutting room on a documentary. I've never, ever been on a project where we knew how we were going to put together the film when we first started.
Yes, all that and a lot more on this edition of The Rough Cut. All right, time to get this thing going. Nice to see you. All right, I can't actually see you. Wouldn't that be something? Either way, I'm very happy you chose to listen to this show, and I hope you're listening because you're subscribed to the podcast and it automatically shows up in your phone or whatever every Monday morning. And if not, maybe consider subscribing. I don't want you to miss anything and miss things like the last 2 weeks of Marvel madness. Yeah, Black Widow followed up by Loki. Those were fun. If you haven't heard them yet, make sure to put those on your list. Seems like we do cover a lot of Marvel stuff on the show, which works for me. I hope you like it too. But something we don't cover nearly enough of is documentaries. Just like their unscripted brothers and sisters in reality television, documentaries are known to strike fear in the hearts of even the most accomplished scripted editors. And why not? Documentaries are hard and they tax every storytelling skill an editor has. Now, if you're looking back through the Rough Cut archives to find an episode about docs, you have to go back to last November when we talked about the docuseries Seduced Inside the NXIVM Cult. And then back to April of 2020 when we covered Tiger King. So I think we have some catching up to do in the documentary front. And catch up we shall. For today we are talking about the documentary Billie Eilish, The World's a Little Blurry, streaming on Apple TV+. The film, directed by accomplished documentary director R.J. Cutler, reveals the behind-the-scenes creation process of Billie's debut studio album, When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go? Well, that's a good question. And when I say behind the scenes, you are right there with Billie and her brother Phineas O'Connell as they create her breakout album in his bedroom. The whole film is an amazing piece of cinema verite, and that is thanks in no small part to the Emmy-nominated work of editors Greg Finton and Lynzee Klingman. You documentary fans will recognize Greg's name from films such as Robin Williams' Come Inside My Mind, He Named Me Malala, and It Might Get Loud. And that's just to name a handful. And Lynzee has certainly made some noise with her work on Bully, Quest, and of course, last year's documentary Oscar winner American Factory. Both Greg and Lynzee have been nominated for things like Emmys and Eddies and other assorted shiny trophies, but as you will hear them say, what matters most is the work and having people see and appreciate it. And we will get into it with Greg and Lynzee in just a few. But first, a few words about the wonderful people that help sponsor this podcast. Now, one thing about these documentaries is the enormous amount of footage of so many different formats that a documentary editor has to manage. And a big part of managing it is moving it all around the world amongst your ragtag team of diehard documentarians. That is never easy. But here's the good news. There are some folks out there that have an excellent way of helping you do that. Their website is massive.io, massive.io, but their nickname is MASV. I guess they were in a hurry to help people move media, so they didn't have time for those extra letters. I got to ask them about that. But let me tell you a little bit about how they can help you. Now, most cloud file transfer solutions only share small to large videos, and they cap at a couple hundred gigabytes at that. And I want you to remember that when you get into the podcast today and you hear the editors talk about having 25,000 hours of video. We're not sure if that number is correct, but still. And these other cloud solutions force filmmakers to settle for outdated and time-consuming transfer processes, like on-site servers or physically shipping hard drives just to move footage. Forget that. Massive's pay-as-you-go model means you only pay for what you need, and there are no limits to the size of the file you can share. You can send uncompressed videos to teams around the world and speed up your production cycle. And if you sign up today at massive.io/theroughcut, just put a few dashes in there between the rough and cut, you can get 100 gigabytes free towards your transfer. As always, I will put a link in the show notes to make it easy for you. But once again, that's massive.io/theroughcut for 100 gigabytes free towards your transfer. And now that you have access to the very best way to share media amongst your production team, make sure that you have the very best in production audio to share as well. And that's another thing about these documentaries. You got small crews and tight budgets. You want great composers, but you can't afford to go out and hire a great composer. But maybe you can with our sponsors at Extreme Music. Since 1997, they have been providing content creators in the scripted and unscripted worlds with amazing music created by the top names in production and composing. Names like Hans Zimmer, Trent Reznor, and Mark Mothersbaugh, just to name a few. All you got to do is visit their website, extrememusic.com, and do a quick keyword search on just about every aspect of music to find just what you need. Their deep catalog is customizable right down to the instrumentation, so you get your tracks just the way you want them. It is free to try and fun to do, and the absolute best way for you to ensure that your project sounds great. Do it all online or with one of their reps at an office near you who can help with all that licensing. So the next time you have a great story to tell, visit Extreme Music and get some great music. All right, speaking of great music, it's time to turn our attention to Billie Eilish, whose world seems to be a little blurry. Let's see if the editors can help bring it all into focus. Here are Greg, FINTON, and Lynzee. Well,
You look great.
that's not a bad thing.
Ah.
You know, in looking at your respective careers, it's hard not to see that they are both predominantly in the documentary space. So before we jump into this particular film, let's talk about what it is that attracted you to the doc genre in the first place and why you're so comfortable there.
Cutler is the one who is largely responsible for getting me into the documentary world. I was editing narrative scripted for probably the first 10 years of my career. And I also did a lot of writing during that time, and I did a little bit of directing as well. And when I sort of stumbled my way into this show called American High with R.J. Cutler, my first day in the chair editing on a doc, I just instantly fell in love with it. And I think it was largely because it has, being a documentary editor, I think is as close as you can get to being a writer or director without having those titles in a certain sense. Like I should say we have a lot more input, in those areas as a documentary editor than I found I was having in the scripted world. And so for me, I fell in love with it straight away. This was like the spring of, or the very beginning of the year 2000. And I've only worked in docs ever since.
How about you, Lynzee?
Well, I've always sort of worked in the documentary world, first in short format docs for the internet, and then that kind of evolved into editing feature docs. I did one fiction film, but honestly, I found it not nearly as exciting, and for all of the reasons really that Greg said, which is, I didn't feel the same authorship over, the film, and I like writing. I actually got into film it was born out of a creative writing career. And then when I discovered that you could write with images and music and performance and color and all these things, it was so exciting to me. And so I like not having a script. I like, it makes it very hard because often, you're working with hundreds or thousands of hours of footage and no script, but the creative opportunities there are endless then. And honestly, you hear people say about documentaries, especially people who are working on them, I don't have the material I need, and the truth is that so much of what we do is born out of the limitations of the material that we have. And some films have more limitations than others. Some films you have all the goods and all the gold is there and you can kind of, it's still hard to weave it together. But other films, you can have none of what you wish you had. But then with those limitations, you're forced to come up with creative solutions for telling the story. And so it kind of puts you in this place where you end up making things you could have never imagined you would have made when you started the project. And so there's something about that process that I find really exciting.
Would you ever consider going back into scripted? Is there the type of project out there that you think like, well, I'd still like to try and tackle that one particular genre in the scripted world?
I think Greg doesn't, I don't want to speak for Greg, but we've talked about this, and I'm excited by the idea of doing a fiction project, but it would have to be it would have to be something that wasn't so scripted to it would have to be something that had kind of still this freedom that I have in the documentary world, but has scripted elements. So I think that I'm probably more open to it than Greg. I don't know if Greg wants to go back.
I don't know if I would want to go back either, honestly. It's such a different muscle, and I've just really, really grown to love the challenge of documentary filmmaking so much. I love how our crews are comparatively quite tiny and quite small. And so the relationships that you form on a documentary are much more intimate and, for better and for worse than it was for me in the scripted world. And I'm really attracted to that as well.
Lynzee, we'll have to find you a nice feature with a lot of script problems. How about that?
Yeah. Well, no, I think when we were talking about this, I was like, documentary is just too hard. I have these moments where I'm like, I want something that doesn't feel so hard. And then Greg pointed out that the fiction world comes with its own set of hardships.
I've heard.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this particular documentary. Production began in 2018, from what I've read, and was completed in early 2020. You were both busy working on other projects at the time. So what were the circumstances and the timing for each of you joining this film?
So RJ had contacted me about working on it. Boy, I don't remember the exact dates or anything, but first reached out to me to see if I'd be interested. And shockingly, now looking back on it, I knew very little about Billie at the time. He said, he asked me to like research some of her music and do a little digging. And then he invited me to come see her at the Greek Theater here in LA. And I was so blown away. Like, I had not been in a crowd like that since some of the early punk rock shows of the late 70s, early 80s. And I fell in love with her right there. And I remember telling him at the end of that night, I said, I'm doing this film. I'm definitely going to work on this film.
Yeah, I met RJ about 10 years ago when I had premiered a film at Tribeca, and we met and became fast friends, and then lost touch over the years. And then I had cut a film called American Factory, and he had sent me an email after that film had been out in the world for a while. He sent me an email just congratulating me on the film. And then we started talking, and turned out I was in LA, and he had this project with Billie Eilish that he was looking for a Verite editor for. And American Factory was a Verite film. So I think we started talking about it and met for coffee. And I was actually coming off of another pop star film, so I was very reluctant to sign up for another female pop star film because I didn't want to suddenly become the editor that was working on female pop star documentaries. But it was clear to me that his access was incredible, and that they had really embedded with her and her family, and the material was going to be really rich. And I knew enough about Billie to know that it was the kind of film you got to take.
Well, Lynzee, you said the access that he had was really incredible, and it certainly is. At least on the scripted side, when somebody's pitching you a project, you have a script to look at. In this case, he had already begun filming. Were you able to look at anything he had shot already? Did that factor into your decision? For Greg, it was the concert and I got to do this. But do you actually look at some of the footage he has already? Does that weigh in on this could be tough, or wow, what he's got here is pretty incredible. I got to do this.
Before I take a film, I always look at the raw material, at least not all of it, obviously, but I ask to look at some of the raw material, because oftentimes at that stage when they're hiring, they have like a sales reel or a promotional reel, or they have something they've put together. But it can be very hard to see the possibilities of the material when you're looking at something that's already been edited. So I always try to see that raw material to understand if it's something that I could work with, if it's something that I feel like I can make something of. And in this case, I didn't look at any of the raw material, but he did have a sizzle reel, and I knew RJ and his work well enough to know, and looking at that sizzle reel, that the material was there to build this kind of rich portrait. But it wasn't until Greg and I started kind of screening the raw material together did we fully understand how rich it was.
Is it most often the case that in documentary that the footage, or at least any new photography that is done, has already happened before you start editing? Or is it just like the scripted world where most often, you're there on the project from the beginning and you're cutting as soon as they're shooting stuff?
For me, it's varied greatly over all the films that I've done. I'm happiest coming in as close to the beginning as possible. That's not always possible, of course, with documentaries, but I feel like the film benefits the most from the earliest I can start. Some of my favorite collaborations have been when I've been on before we even start shooting, and I'm just able to speak with directors and cinematographers and anyone else who's might be involved with the project, and just having those conversations. For me, that's more important than even seeing footage. I like to have conversations with the director normally and just sort of see where they're at with the subject matter and what their take is on it. And to me, that's almost like the most important part of the process, because if you're they say in the scripted world that 90% of directing is casting. Well, I think in the documentary world, the same can be said about hiring, for editors or producers in the documentary world. There's been projects I've been on that have been a great match, and I think it just works really well that way. And then there's been other projects that I've been considered for, or even considered, where I just tell them, I don't think I'm the right person for this,
other than conversations between editor and director, what about the conversations that happen between the two of you? I mean, I don't believe the two of you have worked together before prior to this. If I missed that, please forgive me. But you're working together for the first time. What is that getting to know you process, that feeling out like, how does this person like to work, and how are we going to complement one another?
I mean, it was a great. That was a great piece of casting by RJ. You know, he clearly recognized that Lynzee and I would each bring something to this project individually, and even more so collectively. And Lynzee asked to have coffee with me when she was still considering doing it. So we met one afternoon, and I thought we just hit it off well right from the beginning. She may tell a different story. I don't know, but I liked her right away. So
no, I liked him right away because I think, yeah, I mean, you have to like each other. and I think co-editing can be very tricky, or when you have a team of editors, because not only does that mean that everyone's bringing like a different aesthetic and a different style and different instincts, but you just have different personalities. And I definitely, at this point in my career, it's like, I want to work with people I like and that I have fun with, because if the process is painful, it's not good for anybody. It's not good for the film. So yes, I really loved Greg the moment I met him, and we had a great time working on this film together.
And I do think there was such a great chemistry between us, and as far as what we were each able to bring, I mean, Lynzee absolutely brought stuff to this film that I never would have brought on my own, So I do think it was like RJ really had the foresight to know that we were going to gel that way.
Was there anything that the two of you picked up from the other one in terms of technique or just approach to the craft? When you're working with an editor, sometimes you look at things from their point of view and like, wow, I never thought to use the tools that way, or to approach and edit that way, or just approach the job itself that way. Anything that jumped out at you?
God, a million things. A million things.
I know one.
Go ahead.
Well, I think I tend to take I like things really like raw and loose and very, I love cutting Verite. I tend to be really attracted to Verite projects. And I know Greg also has worked with Verite quite a bit, but I thought, Greg, that you did such a great job of bringing music and montage into the film, which, I love doing that stuff as well, but I think I gravitate more towards the Verite stuff first. And so I don't know, do you think that's accurate, Greg?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think like music is one of the things I enjoy working with the most in all forms of filmmaking. And I think that I lean towards like emotion first and everything else be damned, and Lynzee does as well. But Lynzee's a lot more patient than I am. And I definitely learned a lot about, taking time with, especially going through Verite footage and letting things like really breathe and just be patient with it. Let it live for a little bit longer in this state. And, we'll get to the bone of it a little bit later, but, let's absorb what it is that we really like about this. And there were a few times I definitely cut too deeply, and we all felt it. And that's where I think Lynzee's patience with that really, was something I really learned from.
My husband would not describe me as patient, but I'm happy to hear that it's a quality I possess in this world.
So patient or not, you both have really shown your love for documentary and explained that one of the reasons you love it so much is it comes with this built-in uncertainty that you're discovering the film, you're not making the film.
Yeah.
The film itself covers the creation of Billie's debut studio album as well as the tour that goes along with it, up until her big win or big wins at the Grammys. What did RJ have sketched out for you? I mean, was there a form in place, like these are the things we're going to hit, this is the story we're going to tell, or is the film discovered in the cutting room, as they say?
I think the film's always discovered in the cutting room on a documentary. I've never, ever been on a project where we knew how we were going to put together the film when we first started, nor have I ever worked with a director who had an exact roadmap for how we were going to get there. RJ had really great, strong, big ideas about her narrative and pivotal moments. Like, he was there when they were filming Coachella. And I think for him, he witnessed that moment as the moment where she went from being this kind of not underground sensation, but it's where she went from being like the Billie Eilish of the small venues to the pop star that she is today. And it was in that moment at Coachella because it was like the biggest show of her career. And so much was riding on it. And it was a huge audience, a huge stage. And so, like RJ always kind of talked about Coachella being that moment. And so, I think he kind of understood the big access points of her career. And, but we filled in a lot of the details and the lead ups to that. And I don't know. Do you think that's accurate, Greg?
Yeah, I'd definitely say like one of the beautiful things and maybe one of the strongest things about documentary filmmaking is that you have to be open to what the story really is. When you come in with a preconceived notion and you try to force that notion onto the film, it just rejects it, and the audience feels that as well. And RJ is so brilliant at allowing discovery to happen.
Yeah.
And he absolutely allowed for us to play and discover. I mean, right from the very beginning, we spent weeks just screening together and not even thinking about cutting, just discovering and discovering and discovering. And I remember early conversations with RJ, his original concept was that the film was going to end with Coachella. And then the story kind of kept going. And then it was going to end with, this big night she had in Los Angeles that night at the Greek Theater that I went to. And then but the story kept evolving and happening.
And remember, Greg, he thought that it was going to start with the launch of the album.
Right.
But,
right.
Once we discovered all of Maggie's footage and we were like, oh my God, we have them writing the entire album in the bedroom. That's the kind of stuff that you don't walk away from that. That's incredible material, incredible access. And it was like, well, why would we start with the launch of the album if we could watch her write the album and then launch it? And so again, like that became the first act. And I don't think when RJ started that he imagined, we would have all that and we'd be able to build that. So that absolutely was, built in the editing room.
So knowing that, Maggie her mother had shot a lot of this stuff that was just an embarrassment of riches. Where did RJ's photography begin? At what point in the timeline is the director's footage actually beginning?
Europe.
So there's a lot of stuff that came from the family themselves that you were able to utilize then.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out that I think it's awesome that RJ is the kind of director who can recognize that even if it's not his footage, that it's very much a part of the story he's trying to tell. I think there's a danger sometimes, like if your ego gets in the way, and you don't want to use it because your crew didn't shoot it or something. I don't think RJ would ever think that way because he's a pro and he knows that the emotion matters. What came before his crew arrived matters, especially if it's a part of the story we want to tell. And so, like that concert at the beginning of the film is a previous crew shot that. But never for a moment did we not consider using it because it was something that we inherited. It was, very much a part of the world we were building. And we needed to see her at that moment so that we understood her complete rise to stardom, to see her in that little venue and to see her fans connecting with her in that way. So I think it's awesome that we were able to use all this stuff.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that concert at the beginning of the film because there's a few elements to it that I wanted to talk about. And the first is that, as you're watching it, what you see is a sea of cell phones being held up in the air. The kind of footage you have access to in this generation compared to, Greg and I were talking earlier about the Robin Williams doc, where having to find footage, even photos of him just starting out, that's a huge discovery process, a huge procurement process. Whereas here, everybody's got their phone up pointed at this girl. And so there's got to be footage of her everywhere. So whereas in a lot of docs, the challenge is procuring or creating the media, this one seems like the challenge is really more about just getting through the massive amount of media that could be made available to you and just parsing through that.
Well, a great example of that is the show in Milan, Italy. There were no film crews there that day. And we were able to create that scene, to demonstrate and show that scene based all on cell phone footage that was recorded that night.
The scene where she falls on stage,
twists her ankle really badly. Yeah, that was all. Her mother Maggie was shooting from the wings that night, and then we managed to get a few people who were in the crowd. We managed to get footage from them from their cell phones. So we were able to create that entire scene just through cell phone footage.
We've already established that a lot of footage was shot by Maggie prior to RJ getting there. But when he was there, was it just him? Did he have a small crew? What was the size of the production that was going on? Because they lived, I should say, in a very small house and very close quarters.
Yeah, our cinematographer, Jenna Rosher, did such an amazing job. Neither Greg or I were ever there while they were filming, but it was Jenna and Jay who did sound and RJ. And I think it was just the three of them really that were there filming. And I think RJ was smart to keep it small because even just her house is not big enough, to have a huge crew in. But there's a real intimacy, I think, that comes with that kind of approach to the production.
The three of them were able to become part of the family for, the years that they were involved in making this film.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to say about your previous question too is we had a storied producer, Jonathan Ruane, who had started screening all of this footage well before Greg and I even started. And he had created a kind of massive log of Maggie's footage and some of the previous crew's footage that had been shot. And he became, really indispensable to us because as we started putting the story together, there would be very specific things we needed. Like I remember we needed a sense of them finishing the album, right? And because it was suddenly you can't just finish the writing of the album and then release it. You needed to somehow tie up that chapter of the story. And I remember going to him and being like, what do we have? Do we have anything? And I was able to marry a bit of Phineas saying, I think we just finished the album with a clip of Billie and her mom in the kitchen singing a cool song. And it all sort of feels like the end of that chapter, but I wouldn't have been able to kind of cobble those pieces together had it not been for J. Rue's extensive knowledge of, the library footage that we were working with. So, he was really indispensable to us.
So that indispensable knowledge has to translate at some point into some taxonomy, some structure for organizing this material. So that when you sit down, whether it's just the metadata aspect of it that you set up or how you organize it within the Avid, how do you organize this material? How do you break it down so that when it's time to sit down and start cutting a scene, you know where the things are that you need, you know how to find, all the little story points that make up this film?
Gosh, that was kind of an ever evolving process as well. I think we started originally by dates that things were shot, and then we would subcategorize. Certainly, all the concerts were obviously in their own giant folder to begin with, a project at first, and then we would start to subcategorize those into different subjects or themes we would think about. I mean, I guess anytime we could think of a subject or a theme that could help refine and define something, we certainly kept our assistants, Onika Austin and Jonelle, quite busy, as well as Jonathan Ruane, J. Rue, as we affectionately refer to him.
Yeah, the Verite, I think because we knew the story, because she changes physically, she's she goes from being a 16-year-old to an 18-year-old, and you can see that. We kind of knew we had to follow the chronology more or less. So the Verite was organized, I think, chronologically always.
Hair color was a big...
Hair color was also because you couldn't cheat certain things because she went from having the green roots to the, having the purple hair to the green roots. So that's tricky. But then the concerts, like Greg said, I remember when we first started organizing that, it was okay, it doesn't matter. The chronology somewhat matters, but at a certain point I needed to be able to open a timeline for Ilo Milo, one of her songs, and see all the performances I had of Ilo Milo, or all the performances I had of When I Wish You Were Gay. Because when we were going through that process of figuring out what songs live where, that was how we organized the concerts was a big part of that, because we were able to pull up songs and then kind of watch her evolution of that song on one timeline. So depending on the media, it's like how we organized it. But as far as Maggie's footage, that I think there was like 25,000 hours of Maggie's footage.
Not 25,000.
No, that's what J-Rue said once.
25,000? Geez, how did we ever make this film?
She filmed everything. She filmed everything.
I remember that, but was it really? I always ask to not know the numbers because like things like this blow my mind too much.
I mean, maybe now you're going to publish this podcast and I'm wrong, but I do remember at one point J-Rue saying there was somewhere like that was the number. It was like over 20,000 or 25,000 hours of footage. And so I don't even think J-Rue was able to go through everything Maggie shot, but he went through quite a bit of it.
Well, clearly it was a lot of footage. And so taking that into consideration, and also the fact that in a scripted feature where there are multiple editors, a lot of times they'll break up the workload by scene, or maybe, one editor is more of a specialist in this type of sequence or scene than the other, and then they'll divide up the work that way. In something like this, where you're both trying to find the structure, trying to find the story, how do you divide the workload?
We started very, very simply, as simply as we could, and it was first half, second half, just to get us going, to get us started. And we raced toward a first cut. That first cut was well over 24 hours long, and it took us an entire week to screen the first cut.
And then it got longer.
Then it got longer by at least six more hours. So, we sort of kept it first half, second half for a while. And then at a certain point, Lynzee said, why don't we switch? And I've been involved in films where we talked about doing that all the time, and then we never, ever did. But on this one, we did. And it was brilliant. And it was so liberating, We'd been sitting with certain scenes for a long time. We got to switch. And then so suddenly I had a whole new set of scenes and Lynzee had a whole new set of scenes. And we both brought some new life into those areas as well. So, and I think you talk about earlier, Lynzee, about not bringing ego into projects, like RJ not bringing ego with discovering this other footage. I think for us to not bring any ego into I didn't mind, that was me, that was this, I think really benefited this project greatly as well.
Well, it's so nice I think this is part of why you and RJ and I got along so well, is that I don't think any of us, listen, everybody always brings ego. I mean, there's always a certain level of ego, but I think we were all really good at keeping ourselves in check so that we weren't arguing for things, that weren't benefiting the story, because oftentimes if you're attached to something you did, you could argue for it, even though it's not working. But I think we were all really able to recognize when something was working for the film and when it wasn't working. And so it was just really nice that the conversations and debates we were having were really about the film and not about something else, which can happen on docs.
I have a saying that I try to live by is I enjoy being wrong about something, because if I'm wrong, that means it's better than I thought it was, or it can be better than I thought it could be. And so I love being wrong.
Well, a staple of so many documentaries that aren't able to capture the subject or the story in the moment is using animation to recreate elements that you just couldn't capture or you could never access. You obviously don't have that problem here. It's footage and titles.
And no lower thirds. No one's ever identified in that way or anything. So
then let's hit pause on my question and let's talk about that a little bit and just the philosophy behind that. What did, whether it was RJ or anybody else, where did you guys come to on that whole, we're not going to be so in your face to the audience. We're going to just let them discover things on their own, I guess I should say.
I remember it as we'd put together these cuts that were quite substantive and long in their running time. And we were always about clarity and can we make it clear without having to rely on any of the normal crutches that we would normally rely on and keep it strictly verite always. And as we were whittling it down and we were retaining clarity, I think we just sort of realized we don't have any lower thirds in the film still. We never identify anyone. And I think it just came to a point where it's I don't think we're going to do this, are we? We're not going to be putting any lower thirds in it. We don't need to know that person is specifically this job to Billie or this type of job. We know We know that they're involved in her life and that, you know, and that she has this rapport with them and she relates to them this way. That's what's important. And we're getting that through the footage. So why pile on?
Well, and I think not, you know, lower thirds are not insignificant. It's a big decision to use lower thirds in a documentary. And to be honest, like I think we really tried to do that work in the cutting of the scenes. Like I'll give you an example. There was a cut, like when the record executives come to the bedroom and listen to the songs. We had a cut where we had tagged the like whatever president of Interscope or whoever he was, and it was like so redundant because at that point it's like if it's not obvious to you that these are some sort of executives with some probably her label, then it's like, were you not paying attention to the, you know, like we had already done the work in the scene building, you know, by, you know, having Justin Lubliner talk about the release strategy. Well, you know that he's clearly an executive or somebody who works behind the scenes. And so it felt like the moment we put a lower third tag on those guys, we were like, no way do we need to do this. And I'm sorry if you didn't get that, then maybe you're not paying attention to the film. You know, so I think we all come from this world of like, well, we don't need to crutch on those devices. If the storytelling is strong enough, then we don't need that.
Well, as so often is the case, your answers were much better than the question I was going to ask anyway. So that's good. I was going to go down the road of just animation for animation's sake. In other words, she's such a visual person that you go through her notebooks and the sketches and drawings that she does. You know, a lot of times that would lend towards, hey, let's sort of bring that to life. But clearly, based on your answer about the lower thirds, you wanted this just to be as raw and as authentic as possible without even going there.
It was so liberating to do a film without animation. There's not a still photo in the film anywhere. Mm-hmm. There's nothing. It is pure verite, and I just found it very liberating.
Yeah, I think if we had done some sort of slick animation, it wouldn't have felt like Billie. It wouldn't have felt like the film about Billie, which is right. The film that it is. It has a kind of, you know, a rawness, like you said, around the edges. Things are not too slick, and that is a stylistic choice, you know?
Other than RJ's footage that he shot, you mentioned having crews that had shot some other concert stuff. Are you actually cutting concert footage together? Are you actually working with concert footage that was shot for some other reason?
I think all the concerts we had raw footage for, so we never had any other cut of any concert or show or anything like that. So we were extremely lucky to have raw for everything, absolutely everything. So
yeah,
we had so many concerts and entire concerts for every show pretty much.
But they weren't all multicam.
No.
Some of them were covered better than others. The South Street Seaport show, which is the show that's roughly like, I don't know, an hour and a half into the film, maybe, where she's in New York City, right before she has that like backstage meltdown where all those people are asking for her autograph. That show, there were like 5 cameras. It was beautifully covered, and we had a lot of great audience shots. So that becomes a big concert moment, in part because it was really covered really beautifully, but also because it was a good lead-in to that storyline. But there were some shows where there were big gaps, like where there was black, and it was like, you know, I had no shot of Billie singing in the moment because the camera was rejiggering. So that was, you know, we had to kind of work around that.
Yeah, music was never an issue. They were always recorded pretty well. I don't remember anything being musically unusable or anything like that. And you know, another thing on that end is they gave us all the stems for all their songs. So we were able to even like, you know, the recorded songs, if we asked for them, they would give us stems and we could pull out certain things. And, you know, if it was being intrusive on the picture and stuff. And that was a real treat to be able to work with.
There's a scene towards the end where she's reading from her diary and there's a piano playing in the background. She's looking at a sketch she did, I think, and she says, wow. She sort of sings the word wow, but it's in key with the piano that's playing in the background. Is that just a happy accident, or is that something because of the benefit of having access to the stems, you were able to manufacture that moment?
That particular song was not the recorded version of the song that we're hearing there. That was the version that she literally played for us on camera. And if I remember correctly, I used another version that she played on a different piano in Phineas's bedroom at the time as well to start that sequence with. And then at some point transitions to the performance that she plays in the living room on a different piano. But come on, she's Billie Eilish. Of course she's going to sing on key. She's not going to say wow off key.
Well, okay, so let's build on that a little bit. Did she weigh in at all? Did she have any input on like how, what songs were being used and where and in what fashion?
Never.
She was so cool about, like, she, when you're working on these big celebrity projects, you never know what's going to happen when they see a cut. And she was incredibly moved by our very long rough cut. I mean, she was, I think she said something that was later published in that Vogue article that came out about having watched the documentary and feeling like really seen, like the crew really, like the way we put it together, the way it was captured. She felt that it captured something very true about her experience. And to me, that was like the greatest compliment that we could have gotten, that here's this person who could be incredibly sensitive and picky about the way she looked and the way she sounded. And instead she focused on how we captured the essence of her experience. And, we were all very moved by that feedback when we got it. And she, let us make the film we wanted to make. I mean, I would say largely they were, some of their feedback that we got was really great feedback that helped, sort of make the story better, but none of it changed the essence of the film we were making. It was all little stuff. And that was incredibly refreshing to work with somebody who was willing to be that vulnerable on camera and show, all aspects of her life, even the ones that maybe weren't as appealing as others. I mean, she was able to be a brat and accept that she was a brat in that scene. She didn't make us take it out. It was a part of her experience. So I loved that about her reaction to it.
Yeah, I mean, part of what makes the film as strong as it is Billie's willingness to just be raw and be exposed and be herself all the time, right? And I think that her reactions to seeing that first cut were exactly that as well. I mean, I remember how nervous we all were, like knowing she was going to be seeing it that the day that we finally showed it to her, and we got a pretty immediate response right after she had finished watching that we knew that she had liked it. Yeah.
I gotta tell this story.
Can we tell it?
Yeah, I think we can tell it.
Go ahead and tell it.
Well, we went and watched it. I mean, this was the height of COVID, so we all watched with a mask at an IMAX theater, very socially distanced from each other. But she came up to us. Oh, she had already seen a cut, but she came up to us at one point and said, "You guys did an amazing job. I'm going to buy you both a car." So I don't know. We never got the car. We're still waiting.
You didn't get the car?
I didn't get a car.
Oh,
Did you
man.
get a car?
That's great. Yeah, I love it. I love my car.
Yeah.
Well, she's done a lot of editing in her life. And so we were doubly nervous as editors. It's like, oh my God, is she going to want to take the film away and recut it herself? But
yeah. If Billie ever listens to this podcast, we're still waiting for our card.
I wouldn't hold your breath, but I'll do what I can. Going back to the structure, we talked a little bit about how it started at one point in one place and it was going to end at a different place. And along the way, as you said, you found it in the cutting room where it should start and where it should end. But there is an intermission slide. There is a break in the film. So just tell me about the decision behind having that pause, having that intermission slide, why you did it there and why do it at all.
Greg loves the intermission.
See, it's one place where I'm happy to be wrong. I was not a fan of the intermission at all for a long time. I felt like it was unnecessarily breaking the flow, that we weren't trying hard enough to continue the flow from that day at Coachella into the film without this break, But I ultimately was wrong, and I'm very happy about that. It's a really powerful switch in emotion, and it's a really powerful change of gear for the story right there. And we would have had to decimate the beautiful build that Lynzee built. That whole moment just absolutely crescendos and climaxes. And I think without the intermission, we would have had to knock that down quite a bit. And that would have been a real shame.
It was a tough transition from that night after she felt like she did such a shitty job and her boyfriend was a jerk to meeting Justin Bieber. And we tried everything to bridge those moments. And yeah, ultimately it needed a breath. It needed a break. It needed permission for for the audience to go to the bathroom or take a deep breath or walk away, and it really helped get us to that next day. And we had cuts where we took it out, and ultimately we just felt like it served the story to have that breath.
It's amazing what the versions without the intermission in, what it did to the back half of the whole back half of the film. I mean, it was pretty amazing, to see that.
I asked you about her singing "Wow" and the piano being in key with it. There was another cut that I found pretty enjoyable, and maybe, again, this was just I invented it in my mind or it was something you did on purpose, but there's a scene in her kitchen where she's talking about writing songs that don't alienate people. She's like, I don't want to write songs that alienate people. And then you quick cut to the same sort of setup, but she's not in the frame anymore. It's like later on, she's not standing there anymore. She literally says, I don't want to alienate people, and then she's gone from the frame. I found that delightful.
Well, it's clearly, not so subtle, what's the right word I'm looking for? I was going to make some stupid film school comment about, I think it was, that scene was a really, really tough scene to cut.
No, I think it was just, I think it was just a cell phone that we jump cut, and she was in the frame and out of the frame. And I think what Greg's trying to say is there was no larger meaning behind it. But I'm glad that you read larger.
Yeah, I was looking for the word symbolism. Yeah, you really picked up on our symbolism there.
Let me coach you up for your future interviews. That was completely pre-planned. There's some deep philosophical meaning to why you did it, and you are a genius.
We should have lied.
That truly was. I think that was one of the toughest scenes to cut because, there's a 15-minute version of that scene that lasted for a long, long time. And they covered a lot of different topics within the 15-minute version of that scene. So, there was no coverage because that was Maggie shooting on her cell phone.
That was another scene where, there were cuts where we tried to cover some of those crude jump cuts.
Terrible.
But then it was, so obvious that we were just trying to cover crude jump cuts. And ultimately, we were like, let it be crude. Let it be a crude jump cut cell phone scene. Because the truth is that the scene itself is so rich and what they're talking about is so good that it doesn't matter. It would have been weird if we had tried to turn that into anything other than Maggie's cell phone propped up on a windowsill shooting this. And so that again is what lends to this, I think, feeling of rawness and authenticity throughout the film. And it's because we didn't, we just kind of let things be. And sometimes, I think that's part of being an editor is when not to jump in, when not to make it so smooth, Maybe it's okay to let things be a little rough. That's a choice.
This is the patience thing I was talking about earlier.
Well, you're both very patient to hang with me for so long. I know you've got cognac to pour and free cars to drive. But before I let you go, I just had a couple of notes of things I was like, oh boy, I really want to take this opportunity to ask them about this. And the first one is for you, Greg, and you starting off assisting in features, films like A River Runs Through It with Lynzee Klingman and Dazed and Confused with Sandra Adair. Right there, I would want to know just some quick anecdotes about your time with both those amazing editors, but also starting off as an assistant working in the medium of film and what that might have taught you or better prepared you for being an editor down the road. Is there something about working in an actual film cutting room that has helped you in your career down the road in the world of digital?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. Absolutely. I think, both River Runs Through It and Dazed and Confused, and even I think I did Reality Bites right after that. All three of those films were cut entirely on film. And then I was editing on a film that when I first was starting to cut, we started on digital, we started on Lightworks, and then we had to end up finishing on film. And that was kind of common in those days. Because the only way to screen a cut at that time was you had to have a physical film print. So we would often have a conformed film print that matched our digital cut that we were working on, whatever platform we were on. And so I remember doing this one film, like starting digitally and then having to finish on film. And I was cutting really quickly. I was excited by the new technology, like, cutting fast, what it was allowing me to cut very quickly. And then I went back, and when I was cutting on film, I sort of marked it as like, okay, I'll cut it there. And as I started to physically cut, I was like, wait, is this exactly where I want to cut? Because I don't want to go back and like have to resplice, a 2-frame trim here. And I thought to myself, I should be having that exact same care with the way I cut digitally as I do when I'm physically cutting on film. And from that day forward, I always have like thought about, is this exactly where I want to cut on this frame? And that's absolutely a leftover from my days of physically splicing film together. There were so many great rhythms of those films that you just mentioned are pretty dialogue heavy, and learning from the editors that I work with. Bob Estrin was someone I assisted with for years and years as well. And Bob Estrin is Sandra Adair's brother. And that's how I met both of them. Well, I worked with Sandra first, and then Sandra had introduced me to Bob. But they are both so adept, as is Lynzee Klingman, at cutting dialogue scenes and the rhythms and the pace and everything. And to see how they could change the rhythm of a simple dialogue scene and have it mean something, feel in a completely different way was just eye-opening to me. That I found that much more difficult to cut than say, an action scene.
So you're both nominated for your work here on this film, and rightly so. But that's not new to either of you. What kind of impact can that have on a documentary editor's career?
I would say it's just easier to be picky about what you choose next. Like, you just have more options. It's that simple. There's more projects coming to you, more options, and you can say no to projects you don't want to do. And that's not something you get to do early in your career. You kind of have to take everything early, or, do a lot of work, or sometimes work for free. I mean, I did everything to get my hands on projects so that I could build to that point where, I can now be a lot pickier about what I choose to work on and who I choose to work with. So that's really special. But I also think when RJ reached out to me about this Billie doc, he so admired my work on American Factory. And honestly, that was probably more than anything why I came on this project. I mean, obviously, Billie's an amazing subject and I wanted to work with her material, but knowing that my director saw what I did on another film and liked the style and liked the approach, that is huge for me, because when I'm signing on to a project, I want to know that the director understands what I do and is hiring me for that, not because I've worked on successful films, but they can see the craft of what I've done. So that's the kind of thing that if I can see that a director can see that, then I think that they're well versed in the language of filmmaking, if that makes sense. And I can connect with them on that level because they connected with my craft. So that becomes important to me. It's not like if I just get a director who reaches out because they've heard my name or something, it's not quite the same as a director saying, I love what you did on that past film. When Julia Reichert approached me about American Factory, it was because they had seen a previous project that I had done, Quest, and they saw the film. And then she said to me, I think you're the editor for our film, based on how you put this film together. So I think it's a real compliment to be hired based on your previous work.
Yeah. Visibility is probably the greatest benefit to awards. I mean, we all want whatever we work on to be seen. That's why we do it. That's why we make films. And I've never, ever once ever taken a project because I thought it would be an award-winning project. I take the project because it speaks to me in some way. And I'm totally grateful and feel incredibly blessed that things that I have worked on have been recognized by awards committees. But the thing that I'm happiest about with all of that is that it increases the visibility for the work.
The work that you've both done has certainly earned you the right to be more picky, to choose what you do with your time. I'm very grateful that you chose to spend this time with me to talk to me about this documentary. I would love to show you my appreciation by buying you each a car like Billie Eilish. I can't do that. I got a couple of Avid mouse pads, though, that have your names on it.
Nice. Yes. I need an Avid mouse pad.
Note to self, order 2 mouse pads. Got it. Totally worth it. I learned a lot and I enjoyed a lot about this project, the Billie Eilish doc. and I certainly learned a lot from Greg and Lindsay. So thanks to both of them for dropping the documentary science on us today. I hope you enjoyed it. You got a doc of your own in mind? Well, good. Get out there and make it. And when you make it, the nonlinear editing system that gives you the best tools for managing media, for managing huge projects, and for searching seamlessly for sound bites within hundreds of hours of interviews? Well, that would be Avid Media Composer Ultimate. So download the free trial and give it a try. There is a little link for you right there in the show notes. You know, I don't think this documentary train has reached the station yet. Still more for us to learn. And that is what we are here to do. Learn from the amazing editors who move and inform audiences of every kind of story. So come on back next week and we'll do a little more learning. Until then, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.